Hey, welcome to our normally Wednesday afternoon broadcast. Today we're doing Thursday. I'm Heidi Priebe.
And I'm Denzel Mensah.
And last week we were talking about the perceptive cognitive function axis, so how your N and your S functions work in tandem with each other. And this week we are doing the same but opposite. So we're doing the decision-making function axis and how those cognitive functions work in conjunction with each other. So we'll be talking about how your thinking and your feeling function work together, whether it's TE, TI, FI, FE, how those play off each other and help you optimize what you know and how you make decisions.
So essentially, for those of you who may not know, there are 8 cognitive functions in total. And last week we went over the perceiving functions, which were SE and NI, which always come together, and then NE and SI, which always come together. Extroverted feeling and introverted thinking always come together as a pair, and then extroverted thinking and introverted feeling always come together as a pair. So we're going to be pretty much hitting that axis of why they always come together in a pair and how they work together in that pair.
Something that I think we should clear the air about right away is a lot of what we hear in the type world is there's a lot of prejudices against I think feeling in particular as a decision-making function. So you'll get a lot of thinkers kind of looking down on feeling as a way of analyzing information and making decisions. But I think that that's ironic because everyone is using all of their functions all of the time. So what we want to talk a little bit about today is not only how those functions work in tandem, but the fact that they always are working together. So it's very hard. And this is something that I pick on when people get really picky about oh, I've been in a loop for 5 years or whatever. I'm well, you're never really using one of your cognitive functions that works in tandem with another one without also using the other one. So I, as an FI user, am almost never using my T function not in conjunction with my F function. And same goes for thinkers. They're never using their thinking function without in some way involving their feeling function. We're just not as conscious of the way that we're doing that. So a good way, I think, to describe the FI-TE axis in that order, and then we'll talk about TE-FI, is FI tells you what you want and TE tells you how to get it. So FI makes you aware of, what feels good, what feels right, what feels meaningful. It makes you aware of your values. And then TE tells you what actions to take to go about to achieve that.
Yeah. For me, I definitely see FI is sort of like the cheerleader in a way, as and I guess this more goes maybe even for the TE FI axis, which is it's the same axis, but when TE is above, so I guess we'll get there. But it still goes in. The FI user, the FI is kind of like the cheerleader, where all the passion comes from, where the fire really is ignited. And then TE is pretty much like the engine or the vehicle that pretty much gets the passion to where it needs to go to. I've seen ESFPs so often, where they want something, they just jump into action on okay, how can I go get it? And they just go straight after it. And then ENTJs, same thing. They have if they have their mindset on something, they just go after it in that way, as opposed to maybe ISFPs, where they'll spend a lot of different time, they'll spend a lot of time really trying to solidify that value because they have FI as a dominant function. But then as they really gather all of that fire and they really have it burning heavy, then that's when later on they have to jump into action a little bit, and then the TE will kind of kick in, but it'll only kick in after they've already gathered so much passion and values and all of that in that top FI. So then that's kind of how you'll then get it to work together at the end, as opposed to when you're looking at the ESFP and the ENTJ maybe, where they seem to just have a quicker communication between the FI and TE to just engage right away.
But I do think when you see that action, a lot of action being taken on causes, that tends to be an EFP thing because FI and TE are so closely related, so closely together for FP or for EFPs. So you see a lot of oh, I see a change I could make. I'm going to jump into action. Or it doesn't have to be, it could also just be a thing I want. It could be totally selfish. It could be a horrible thing, but that's kind of how it works. Then I think how it works differently if you're using TE and then FI is, I think first you do what is logical. So like you look at kind of like a goal you want to reach, and well, FI is feeding some information into that. A lot of the time it is purely logical. Like you might want to like do X, Y, or Z, but like you'd make more money doing A, B, or C. So you choose A, B, or C because you want to maximize like these things that will keep your life running smoothly, and that make the most sense for your goals. So TE is very much about like goal setting, but then after a while, I think FI kind of kicks in to tell strong TE users like, okay, now that we've done all these different things, like here's what felt the most meaningful, and here's what it might be worth focusing more of our attention on. And then TE will kind of bring that into its value system and then readjust its values based on that.
So like my ENFP friend, not everybody in like they're in the choir, and like not everybody in the choir has to agree with what he thinks is wrong about what's going on in the choir. He just has to believe it, and then he will like pretty much like stand up to make like a difference. And then contrast that with me. I guess now we're kind of like transitioning to like FETI. Like I would have to like I would be led to make that same difference that he would, only if I felt like I was making that voice for everybody else, if that makes sense. Yeah. So then for him, and me and him had a conversation about it, and we thought it was like very fascinating. Like for him, like if he feels like no, this isn't right, like how we're being treated or whatever in this group, then even if like he wouldn't have to even ask other people. It's not saying that FI users would never do that, but they don't feel the need as much, because it's like no, my feelings are already like valid. My feelings are already validated. So if this is how I feel, then that's how I'm just gonna like set forth and like do it. And there's lots of pros to that, and there's also lots of cons to it. But then with me, with that FETI, then like if I feel like oh, there's some type of like wrongs being made against me, but then I ask around and other people are like no, I think that everything is fine. Then I'll be like oh, okay. Then I'm not going to speak up. I'm not going to say anything about it until I see that everybody else is like, no, yeah, like, like I feel like they are all having a problem. Then all of a sudden it's like, oh, well, then let me be the one to articulate and make this happen. So I think that's like already like a very big contrast between like FE and FI. And then you bringing that down to like the TE, TI axis as well. I see it very, very, even for the TI dominance, very harmony oriented, very having the mindset of how can we look at like how can we put aside whatever differences that we have to pretty much like work together like as a team, and like like kind of like there's a word for it, but I forgot what it is. But it's pretty much like, everyone just becoming one and like mixing together, like whatever differences that we have, let's just put them aside and then like come together and like become one. I also always say that FE and TI, what they have in common is that they always want to be on the same page. So like I said with the harmony, but for FE, it's mainly having to do with like external group values. So like what does the group want? How does the group feel about this? What does everybody else think about this? Like, what are the social customs and social norms? Like, things along those lines, while TI wants everybody to be on the same page with like information and data and, things along those lines. And then in order for everyone to be on the same page, then, like FE now has to be rooted in TI principles. And in order to have those TI principles, you have to have the FE in kind of like for principles to be able to work, you have to be able to understand how it would apply to everyone else.
One thing, like just because this relates super well to what you're saying, is I read once like the FETI axis wants to feel correctly and think independently, and the FITE axis wants to think correctly and feel independently.
Wow.
So I thought like, the most spot on, like we're done, we can all go home.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, I actually like I have some like notes from things that I've like thought up, and things I've even like read and things like I've watched up, and like some bullet points for the FETI axis. Like the TI dominant is focused on learning language and customs. The underlying theories is what fascinates them most. While the FE dominant wants focus on speaking the language itself and to communicate to usually create harmony or influence.
I think like what TI and FE really have in common, like you said, is just like everyone being on the same page. And I think like you hear TI dominance online and stuff going like, oh, you know, forget about feelings, blah, blah, blah. But FE is the function that they use when they're like, let's say just like doing a study and figuring out like, does this apply to everybody? Like it's like any sort of like crowdsourcing or like making sure that like everyone's experiences are cohesive and like universal, or whether or not they are, like you have to use both TI and FE for that because you're dealing with other people's experiences, but you're also dealing with the logic behind it. So I think like the TI FE axis works really well together, as does the FITE axis.
So you guys make sure to leave your comments, questions, and be sure to let us know like how it even relates to you. Because just as much as Heidi and I are teaching about it, we love to like also like learn about it as well and continue to gather even more information. So yeah, I think that's all for today, and we're gonna end on time.
All right, we'll see you next time. Yeah.